theory and hypothesis. People misunderstand what those things are. We talk about the theory of evolution. We talk about, the theory of, gravity or whatever. People don't understand what theory really means. And what they think is, they misconstrue theory as being more like a hypothesis. Oh, it's just, it's only a theory. It's just a guess. That's not what a theory is. Just like how when we talk about the scientific process, people don't, when you're in school, you talk about like you get a hypothesis and you form your experiment. That's actually only one part of the entire process. Once you go through that study, you make your hypothesis, you make your experiment, you get your conclusions, you analyze your conclusions. That's one part. So then the next thing you have to do is you have to publish your studies, get that all peer-reviewed.
Get it peer-reviewed, yeah.
Right, which that's a whole beast in and of itself.
Ivory towers.
Exactly. And then you have to have other scientists replicate your results and have that replicated, hundreds of times even before it becomes accepted as a theory. But people just think, oh, theory's a guess.
Right.
They don't see all this entire extensive
Some
process.
of that's semantic, and it's definitely semantic, and
Absolutely.
I can definitely see your frustration coming from it, as somebody who's got a lot firmer grip on the, on the scientific process than I do, because I've been through freshman biology. I generally got a decent understanding of what's supposed to happen, and from my understanding, theories come as the result of experimentation rather than a priori assumptions.
Yes.
The hypothesis comes before and the theory comes from, okay, we've already tested this, and there are still theories that are incomplete. I mean, even general relativity has its holes and its gaps, and that's why people are still doing research and still doing experiments, because you have the greatest incentive in the world as a scientist to prove other scientists wrong, which is an interesting spirit to have, in the spirit, for the sake of progress, proving other people wrong and lifting yourself in a bit on the pedestal, saying, look what I did, but then 100 years from now you could be wrong too. But another piece of the puzzle gets, put hopefully where it should be, and you keep moving forward. Where that gets tricky is when people start doubting the validity of the process itself and start doubting whether or not science is even a reasonable means of knowing or experiencing, because there's kind of the whole science versus religion thing and how it's all oppositional. I've got a lot of friends who, again, we see this rhetoric of debate and this rhetoric of opposition where, people are just so black and white about it, as if everybody on the other side is antagonistic to me and everybody on my side better defend themselves or be ready to attack the other side. We're looking for holes and gaps, as maybe we should be, in that same weird spirit of competition for the sake of progress. It's hard because the detriments there is division, our division, and just a lack of community, and ultimately a lack of progress. If you can't have a consensus in a democratic society at any political level, then you're ultimately not going to move forward, because you can't move forward without leaving the minority behind and disempowering them.
I wouldn't say that it's necessarily competition in the scientific community. I guess the closest thing to competition I'd say is like people wanting to make new discoveries.
Okay.
But wanting to disprove something, I don't quite think that's the mentality. It's not that scientists want to set out and disprove something. It's that you test it over and over and over to make sure it's not wrong.
Yeah, it's not as malignant as I probably described it. It's more with the spirit of, hey, there's something else here and I wonder what it is, and then if that ends up disproving or poking holes in somebody else's stuff, then it does,
It's just like with gravity, people have, over centuries done, thousands upon thousands of tests on gravity, because scientists don't ever like to say they're 100% certain. That is a very frustrating thing about the scientific community. But it's the recognition that there's always something new to discover. There's always something new to learn. So that's why scientists aren't very comfortable with ever saying 100%. Right. Because there's always that chance, and there's a recognition on that. But the problem is the general public takes that and views that 1% chance as, oh, well, then
it's incomplete. It's
exactly,
unreliable.
Which that's not quite the case. I mean, even in the IPCC reports, they use certain language And at this point, we're at, the climate change stuff is extremely likely to be caused by humans. Extremely likely is like 95, if not more, % certainty. Right. And for scientific community, that's as good as it's gonna get.
Well, because there's also spurious information, but that tends to be correlation or something along those lines.
Right. And scientists like to account for everything. They like to account for every possible variable, every possible permutation, everything. And that's kind of what that's meant to reflect every possibility.
Yeah. And I think it also, again, semantically and rhetorically becomes difficult because there is the off chance, and I really do think it's an off chance, but especially having grown up in the church, there is an appearance within the church that people who do science have this air of ivory towers again, and just kind of love to shove their knowledge down people's throats as if they don't have this air of humility about them, as if they don't, just openly admit, yes, there are still holes in the theory that we are actively working on. That's why we have jobs, to do these things. That's why we're scientists, because there's still holes in the theories. The puzzle is not done. If it was done, we would be sitting on our butts in our ivory towers, like drinking a mimosa or something. And so I think there's just a drastic misunderstanding of the heart and the intent behind science. And I think, vice versa with religion, because I think there's certainly antagonism on both ends where people think, oh, if you believe just straight out of the book, there's no scientific process to that. There's no evidence besides archaeological and historical evidence. How reliable is that? Because you're looking backwards instead of doing experiments in the present, this, that, and the other thing. And when we start trying to privilege certain ways and means of knowing exclusively at the expense of every other mean of knowing, and we're silencing people again, that's very detrimental to progress, because the best thing you can get, the most progressive thing you can do is speak with one another and talk with one another.
Yeah, honestly, science and the church have been in conflict since there's been science in the church. They have always been kind of button heads, and I think a lot of that comes from science is viewed as a threat to the concept of God, and science is over here. They're just they want to seek truth and seek to understand the world. Which, the church views that as a threat. So I think, that's one of the reasons why we have so many problems now, is because, we're in a, mostly Christian society. So it's just this mentality of science versus religion. Yeah. It's like, how do you deal with that? How do you solve that debate? And, I don't know if we can.
Right, and I think it truly is the militant 1% on either side, because there are voices from the scientific community, not of the scientific community, but from the scientific community, who are extremely militant about their atheism and saying, hey, not only can or will science eventually disprove God or take away the need for religion in general or faith in general, but saying it already has. How stupid are you now that we understand relativity, now that we understand remotely how climate change works and how the world is spinning and that there's dark matter and all these different things? How can you remotely believe that, there's an invisible dude in the sky taking care of you and holding you like a baby?
Yeah.
It's very, very difficult to have conversations with those types of people, but again, they're the 1%. But I think we perceive that 1% as a much bigger minority or majority than it actually is on both sides. And so that stirs a lot of anxiety when it comes to having conversation, because you're afraid of conflict. But just about any conversation I've had, I've been blessed to have really amicable friends, you know, and just haven't run into a whole lot of super crazy people on either side. But just about every conversation I've had, and I've had quite a few of them, has been polite, has been open, and we usually come to the consensus, it's still up and out there. No one system has got everything completely locked down. Even, in my opinion, if you're a decent Christian, you shrug your shoulders with a bunch of stuff, because you say, if it's not in the book, if God didn't say anything, I don't know. And the same thing with science. If it's not in the book, if we haven't tested it, shrug your shoulders. We don't know yet.
Right. I think the difference is that science has a streamlined process that has been refined over centuries to, broach topics and find truth and stuff like that. Whereas religion, it doesn't have that. I feel like a lot of it's more anecdotal and, is faith and is, trying to draw from a text. And I mean, obviously for me personally, I do skew towards the science side. It's what I'm comfortable and familiar with. I wasn't really brought up with religion. But I think that's like just another point of contention with the scientists towards religion. It's like, well, we've worked out this whole process and it works and we've proven it works, and you're just claiming something, and that makes scientists feel very uncomfy.
Yeah, and then just, I mean, branching immediately down this rabbit hole, it kind of has to be hit on where, you know, there's this whole, oh gosh, I'm going to forget the word for it, but there's this whole line of thought that says science has to be talked about exclusively on scientific terms, and religion has to be talked about exclusively in religion terms, and neither one of them can be perceived as fulfilling the role of the other, that they're mutually exclusive in that respect.
Right.
And so, you know, science is your way and your means of knowing about the world and what's in it, and religion has to be talked about is how you interact with it, and how you participate in it morally, ethically, how you do community well, how you know, don't kill people, don't enslave people, don't treat them poorly, like love one another as you would yourself, that whole spiel. And so there's this whole line of thought that says, okay, it's better if these two things are separate, but as soon as you, in my mind, separate the two, you're just allowing the opposition all the more space in between them to fight and to duke it out. When really, I think there's very, not that overlap is such a hard word and I can't actually pin this down, so I'm struggling with it right now, but it's very hard to actually find a conversation where both science and religion can speak.